We're going to start with kind of a level set because I'm not sure that everybody knows what native agriculture is, and I think that's a really important place for us to start to have the conversation today. So I'll start with you, Zach. What is, in simple terms, what is native agriculture?
It's a good question and a probing question. I think we need to go back in time about 500 years to understand that and chip away at the misconception that this continent was wild and untamed before we got here, before our European ancestors got here. We were managing grazing. We were managing forests. A great place to take off if you want to study a little more about that is the book Indian Givers by Jack Weatherford. Well, what native agriculture is now, it's about a $3.2 billion a year industry for some of the most impoverished counties, the impoverished communities within this nation. And it's a great opportunity to really improve on value-added agriculture to help address that. Native agriculture is also climate-smart agriculture. It's just been rebranded a few times. The holistic grazing systems that Savory is so notable for, that the cover crops that Gabe Brown is getting a lot of credit for highlighting, those are things that our people were doing here up to and beyond 500 years ago. The multi-species, multi-varietal work, Peruvian folks were doing that with potatoes. They had research hills where they would study those different tuber varieties. That's risk management strategies. So native agriculture is really just fundamentally all agriculture done from a thoughtful perspective about being part of an ecosystem instead of trying to exercise dominion over it to your extractive benefit.
Yeah. For those of you standing on the side, there are many seats here if you wanted to come and take a seat for a little bit. So one of the things that I think you said, in particular when we're putting this within the context of the climate crisis, is that a lot of these practices are sustainable. And I think we're seeing more family farmers in particular start to adopt these practices. Is that exciting for you? What role do you think family farmers have in helping maybe preserve some of these practices to help our environment?
Is that me or Eddie?
I'll start with you and then, yeah.
I think beyond sustainable, this is literally regenerating our soil. If we take these approaches, we are improving resiliency to climate crisis. We're improving the use of water. We're providing a more nutritious product by getting deeper into that soil profile and bringing those nutrients into that plant or that animal. So I think it's absolutely critical for that, but it's regenerative and it's additive. It's not extractive.
So I'm going to zoom in now to your farm because you're using a lot of these practices, and I think the beef industry in particular is notorious for being a pretty big polluter. And so I'm interested in knowing what are some of the practices that you're using that are from, it sounds like, many generations back.
So thank you, and I appreciate you mentioning that, Zach, about the history. A lot of people don't fully understand the history, and I'm Lumbee from Robertson County, North Carolina, and our people were on the front line when immigration started. And so I remember when you talk about the practices, some of the basics, I sort of try to stick to the basics. I remember what my daddy told me. You be good to the land will be good to you. And so we try to do that. We do our best. As far as the animals we raise, so we raise cattle that's raised on a vegetarian diet without antibiotics or added hormones. And we try to treat them as good as we can, give them the best life they can. They're in a pasture environment, but we use grains and grasses to maintain them as much as we can. And so all of it's local. It's processed local, all in North Carolina, and it's sold. We have some right over here in Raleigh, some people that sell. So there's not a lot of fuel being burned hauling these cattle across country. A lot of what happens in the cattle industry, the cattle may be from North Carolina, a traditional setting. They may go all the way to Nebraska somewhere to be finished out and then slaughtered and then come back to North Carolina for people to consume. So I think having a local food system is a really good way to minimize our footprint, carbon, and all the kind of stuff that way. So it's a benefit. I think it's an insurance plan. If you think back just a couple of years ago when COVID was really rolling, that some of the grocery stores were running out of meats. And some of the local providers, like ourselves, we had some meat. So I think it's an insurance plan to have family farms that are producing local food system for us. This food system basically in the United States is built around $1. And so it is very efficient economically. But a local food system we need to think about is built on cents. And I don't mean nickels and dimes, I mean common sense. So how do we produce something local, process it local, and sell it local so it's not being traveled? And that's what the native people done here, our ancestors way, way back, and all the people. It's systems based on cheap transportation. And if something happens to transportation where it's not cheap anymore, it's going to drive the price of everything out the roof.
I think there's a lot of consumers in this. There's a lot of farmers here, obviously, today, but there's also a lot of consumers. And I think one of the things that's important for consumers is how to support with their dollars. And this has been sort of a narrative that we've been covering. It started in the press conference. It's come up in every session today that ultimately consumers, the most powerful thing they can do is use their money to support farmers, to support local farmers, support family farmers. How can a consumer find a farmer who is using native practices like you? Like what can I do as a consumer to make sure that I'm finding someone like you and supporting what you're doing?
Well, there's a few different ways. Meat Sweet is one, if you look that up, and it shows all local. It don't have segregated as far as native, non-native peoples. But buying local, it may not be the cheapest, but it's the best value. So we're getting good stuff without a lot of bad stuff. So look at it from that way, as you're getting the best value instead of the absolute cheapest product. And I think there's a lot of positive to buying local, and I appreciate everybody that does that.
And Tomas, if I may,
Sure.
The organization I used to work for before I got this dream job was another dream job. I worked as the executive director of the Intertribal Agriculture Council, and they've got a program developed just to cultivate producers that have market-ready products and take them into the export market. So if you Google American Indian foods, you're going to get to that page. And if you really want to find someone that's doing indigenous work, that'll have the Intertribal Ag Council's badge of approval on it, so you can find it there.
I actually want to ask you about your current job with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and some of the ways that they are supporting these practices, because they are sustainable and they are, in some ways, I think they kind of hold the key to helping us through this crisis. And so what is being done to support these practices, maybe help spread these practices?
The first and foremost thing that we're doing is acknowledging that climate change is real, and we're devoting federal resources to address it. Back in the dirty 30s, there were folks that were Dust Bowl deniers until that cloud hit DC. We've got those same dust storms going on across the prairies right now. South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota had what's called a derecho. When I was growing up, I never heard what a derecho was. We had to create a new word to develop a new word to describe the weather phenomena that are happening as a result of climate change. So we're accepting that, and we're going to devote resources to it. Our Climate Smart Commodities program that we just rolled out last week is a historic investment in developing markets for climate smart commodities. That's going to drive innovation for the next 2 generations, the way the investments in mitigating the impacts of the Dust Bowl did in the 30s. I'm really excited about that. At the Farm Service Agency, we are taking a new approach to how we deliver services to our producers. And you've got an administrator here, your administrator, who is interested in feedback from all of the stakeholders. Every one of these events, I make sure I give out my phone number. And I'll have it over there at the Farm Aid tent. You can scan a QR code, get my phone number. You call, you talk to the administrator of the entire outfit. We're going to be approachable. We're going to listen to the stakeholders and understand what we need to do. But most importantly, we've got to empower producers that are captive to this extractive system through finance that will allow them to make a different choice with their production income, because a lot of those producers tomorrow would do what Eddie and a lot of other producers are doing if only they had the financial support. And our job is to incentivize and provide that financial support through the innovative finance mechanisms that we're talking about inside the agency now. How do we finance a producer that's in a regular feedlot beef production operation to realize they've got a choice? Because right now, it's taken all of their production income and their off-farm income just to make ends meet and keep the family farm together. So we're going to have to do finance different if we're going to have different outcomes.
Micah, I saw you clapping your hands, and you're clapping your hands now. What's your reaction to hearing this? Because I think one of the things I've learned from Farm Aid is that we as consumers play an important role, and the finances are really important. So hearing what Zach is saying, are you optimistic that that change is going to happen?
Well, it's a multi-generational vision. You know, I mean, speaking of the native approach to all of this, they're thinking ahead the next 7 generations. So everything we do now, it's not an instant thing. This is something that if we don't do it now, you know, we're not gonna be so happy in the future. And so we have to plant the seeds now that will grow into the future we want to see. And you know, I'm an artist, I'm a musician, but I'm a curious person. I've grown up learning from farmers and talking to farmers, and I've been particularly interested in the native practices that long before any of us were here, you know, there were people sustainably living on the land for thousands of years and taking care of the land in a way that thousands of years later it could still be feeding people. I'm a huge industrial hemp activist. Back in 2018, 2019, I did a petition that got about 120,000 signatures to pressure Congress to pass the Industrial Hemp Farming Act, which made it into the Farm Bill so that it was descheduled. So now, you know, farmers can have a way to not just phytoremediate soil with this plant. It naturally pulls out toxic metals and radiation out of the soil, but it sequesters more carbon than trees. It requires very little water, 0 pesticides. It can grow in 3 months from seed to maturity, and you can make thousands of industrial products from it. And this is a plant that the natives used all over North America. Our founding fathers used it to found, you know, the country we know of today. But it is heartening, to answer your question, to see more people culturally in the mainstream recognizing the importance of regenerative farming and soil health. And, you know, instead of doing the quick and easy thing, voting with your dollar every time you go to the store, go to the farmer's market, you know, instead of doing the big corporate mega box store, go support your local farmer, or start growing food. Like a few years ago, I had a backyard that was not much bigger than this stage here. It was just dirt. It was not soil. Me and my wife, we started growing worms and growing soil, and we'd take the worm shit and we'd make compost tea out of it, and we sprayed it all over the land. We put our mulch down, and this took time, but it built these layers of soil to when we could plant our hemp. Actually, that was part of the cover cropping, because the roots aerated that soil. And when we used that hemp for making twine and rope and hempcrete and all kinds of things. And then going back to a native wisdom of the 3 sisters, you know, the succotash, the corn, the squash, and the beans together. Those are like a family. And I didn't have corn, but we did pumpkins and we did scarlet runner beans, and we used the hemp, which is a lot like corn. It grows very, very tall like corn. It's very strong. So the beans, they would climb up the hemp, and the pumpkins they benefited from the aerated root systems, and it all worked together. We made apple pie. We had these delicious pumpkins, and these beans, I stored them for like 2 years, and they were amazing. We had Taco Tuesday. We did scarlet runner beans. These purple psychedelic-looking beans. They were beautiful, and they were delicious. But my point is, if a weird artist like me can do this, anybody can do this. Forget your lawn. You don't. I mean, maybe a little bit, but the amount of resources it takes to keep a lawn green, and all the chemicals and all that. You could be growing food that could be sustaining your family in a crisis, or your neighborhood, and making yourself resilient. There's so much wisdom and knowledge, just hundreds of thousands of years of knowledge and experience that we can learn from the native approach to taking care of the land, that will just in the long run and now benefit us a lot more than the quick buck instant gratification thing, which you're feeding the big mega octopus that doesn't give a shit about anybody, doesn't care about the land. And so I'm just humbled to listen and learn to everything you guys have to offer, and your experience in actually walking the walk every day. I'm just like an amateur, part-time farmer, but I just soak up any wisdom I can from these guys anytime I get a chance to talk to them. So thanks for being here and doing everything you do to keep us all fed, keeping the soil healthy.
Well, it's interesting. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
So
go
I'd
ahead.
like to
Yeah.
Just jump in 1 minute. You said something a lot of stuff that was very important, but one thing that caught me for sure, the difference in soil and dirt.
Yeah.
Because a few years back, the gas company was coming through, and I made the statement that they treat our soil like dirt. And so it is a huge difference. The construction companies look at it as dirt, but if you're going to be a farmer, you have to look at it as soil, because there's a lot of biology in there. There's a lot of chemistry. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of life in soil. Dirt don't have life.
Something else that Micah said.
Can I tie in there real quick?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Because this is perfect. So another thing that Micah mentioned, individual citizen advocacy is critically important. He decided he thought hemp should be a crop that's legal to produce. Went out and got it changed. Citizen advocacy involves you all getting out there on the county committee, putting your name on the ballot, and helping us deliver farm policy right out there in your own counties, because the diversity that we're looking for in soil health is a perfect metaphor for the diversity that we need in opinions in how we do our farm programs. Otherwise, we're going to have just more of the same. And don't pass up your chance to talk to somebody about it, and talk to the leadership when you have a chance and say, hey, we need these things. Here's the problem, here's the solution. That's what you advocate for.
You all are on a roll. I think after every response, everyone started clapping. That's the first time it's had that happen on this session, so you all are awesome. I do want to follow up on something that you said, though, which I think maybe many of us could stand to learn something from, which is in being advocates, right? How can we make sure that we're including your voices in that conversation, that we're making sure your perspective, your practices are being brought to the table and are being showcased or are being elevated? Because I think sometimes folks don't even know how to look or start that conversation or even the right things to ask. So from your perspective, like, how do we make sure that we're elevating voices like yours?
So again, I don't get any kickback from Jack Weatherford when I plug his book. But if you want to know what was going on this continent before Europeans got here and did European things to it, read Indian Givers. It'll give you a great perspective on what could be and what we're working back towards. But how do you share that story? You got to first learn it. You got to do some research. You got to understand. They did a land acknowledgement today over at the press conference. Understand what was going on the land before you got here, because it has a story to tell. And if you understand that story, you're going to be a better advocate for what can be, regardless of who's doing it. You know, we're never going to be in a position as Indigenous people where we solidify ownership of the entire continent again, but we can pay due homage to what they were doing here by recognizing that it is part of the long-term solution for all of us.
I think one thing is take just what you need, leave all you can. It's like you said, the 7 generations, and that's exactly right. So we're planting seed, not to harvest. No, I'm harvesting seed that grandpa and great-grandpa planted. And being involved. You know, you hear people talk about the elephant in the room, but I want to tell you about the monster on the farm. The monster on the farm. So over the last 25 years, this monster's been growing. This monster's been growing at a pretty good clip. What I'm talking about is risk for family farms, the financial risk. As it gets more expensive to plant seed, as it gets more expensive for fuel and fertilize and labor and all the things that it takes to make a crop. What concerns me as we are in climate change, I see that. I mean, I'm out every day. I'm in the field. As the climate continues to change, that risk is not going to keep growing at a steady rate. That risk could balloon because we don't know about yields. How is it going to impact the yields? So on a farm, it's a function of price and yield. So we've been working through the price side of the risk, all the input costs and all this kind of stuff. But what's happening now, nobody knows. How is it going to impact the yields and how strong is it going to impact the yields? So I'm concerned about risk protection for family farms, all family farms, native, non-native, whoever, that family farms have options like Mr. Ducheneaux says, financing options that is so important, but also insurance type options, safety nets to protect people. So that's a concern, and it's only important to the people that want to eat. It's not important to nobody else. That's me too.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's all of us.
Make some noise if you eat food.
One thing to tie in there to a little bit to what Eddie's saying, you know, if we start to treat capital like a perennial crop, instead of treating it like an annual extractive commodity crop, we invest it and we take a return and leave it out there to grow. That's capitalism. This extractive system that we're getting into is, like Mr. Mellencamp said, that's just greed. We have to invest that capital out there in these rural communities, leave it there to grow, and take a return that is sustainable so that they can continue to do the good work.
So I found it really interesting that you're like, I'm harvesting things that were planted a generation before me or 2 generations before me, and you're planting the seeds for the generations that come. That's a unique mindset that I don't think all of us have right now, because part of it is we're in a consumer culture. It's like, I want it now, I want it yesterday, I don't really care about what the consequences are tomorrow. How do you think we should go about, those of us who are consumers, shifting that mindset so that we're thinking in that way too? What are we planting today that the next generation or the generation after is going to be able to harvest? How can we begin that mindset shift?
So I think it goes back to policies and people's values. It's like I said earlier, it may not be the cheapest ground beef you can find, but it may be the best value. So you have to weigh out the other things that are involved in that, the production systems and the quality. I went a few years back just for interest to the school system in Robeson County. And I knew they weren't going to buy our ground beef, right, because I knew it wouldn't be the cheapest, but I wanted to go through the system just to see anyway. And what I learned was that on ground beef, they treat it as a commodity. No matter where it comes from or how it's produced, they consider it the same. But just like pizza, school pizzas, they got a kitchen and they'll go in that kitchen and they'll cook these 2 different pizzas. And they have a group of people, 3 or 4 people, that decide if pizza A is better than pizza B and worth more money. And I said, why don't you do our ground beef like that? Why don't you decide if this product actually tastes better and is better quality by the way it's produced and the environment and how it does, and choose the best option for the best value. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and that's the conversation, talking local, buy local, support local, because I think it helps everybody.
Very good. And I would just add on to that, affordable isn't the same as cheap. You can't afford to feed your family some of the things that you're getting in those stores. It's cheap, but you can't afford it. And we've got to continue to push on this paradigm. Another of the initiatives we're working on at the USDA is the More and Better Markets initiative. There's got to be more alternative markets for producers and consumers so that you can make those choices. You can't go to a beef counter and find out where that beef originated right now. That's a problem. And it's coming from one of 4 companies, 2 of which are almost majority foreign owned. That's a problem. That's a weakness in our food system. Imagine if the war wasn't Ukraine and Russia, but Brazil and Argentina. 2/3 of our meat factory goes offline. Then we're captive. So we've got to really treat this as a long-term investment, but it really does come down to a matter of national security. We've got to be able to preserve an affordable and valuable, healthy food source.
I think that's how you pay it to the next generation, by supporting different sustainable models instead of just a few biggest, cheapest producers. Because how did they get to be the biggest and the cheapest? By producing the cheapest product they can, any way they can.
It almost sounds like when we're paying for better quality, we're not just talking about the product itself, but almost it's better quality. It's a 360 better quality. It's better for the environment. It's better for you, your health. It's better for the farmer. It's better just in general. It's quality across the board, not just the product itself.
Yep, and if we're buying it at the farmer's market, 100% of that food dollar is getting to the farm gate. The reality is the average across the country is 12 to 14 cents at best of your food dollar on average gets to the farm gate. We've got to change that system.
So I was given the 5-minute mark like 5 minutes ago, but I'm an optimist and I want to end on a high note. So I'll start with you, Micah. We've been talking a lot about things that need to change, but what is something that you're seeing that gives you hope, that makes you think, you know what, maybe we can plant those seeds for the next generation or the generation after that? Like, what is that thing that keeps you optimistic?
Even since I was a kid, I feel like there's been a massive shift in cultural consciousness towards health, and you know, it's silly, the term health food. You know, food should just be medicine. It's, you know, we are what we eat. And so I guess touching on what you were saying about like discerning the difference between capitalism and greed, discerning the difference between affordable and cheap. You know, if you want to be cheap about it, it's like what you put in your body, you're going to have to pay for it down the line in medical bills eventually. And that's, you know, going to be more than you're going to want to deal with, you know, versus the investment in getting food in you and in your family that is grown sustainably, regeneratively, is filled with nutrients that will sustain your body's health. And at the same time, you're also giving back to the people who actually care about your health because they're taking the time to grow the food in a way that provides that health to you. So it's a symbiotic relationship between all of us and the farmer. And I've seen, as I've gotten older, there has been a shift in recognizing that, I think. Maybe I'm totally in my own little world, but I see more, even like fast food restaurants, at least, you know, if they're pandering maybe, but, at least they're recognizing the market demand for, cage-free eggs or, Beyond Meat or whatever it is, like more organic options, foods, grocery stores actually marketing towards that, and people taking the time to do their research to recognize whether they're full of it or not, so they know what they're putting in their body and what they're feeding their kids. That was something when I was a kid. We just went to Taco Bell every day after Taekwondo practice. We didn't think about it. I think that's a positive shift, and it's easy to get cynical about so many things, but like we were all saying, this is a generations-long fight. It's not going to happen overnight, but I know I said earlier, growing your own food as much as you can and learning the native ways of doing it. I know I said it can help you in a crisis, as if there's a crisis down the road, but we're in the crisis. The crisis is happening. So it's really up to all of us to demand this from the government, from corporations, from all the people that have the power to really just snap their finger and make this shift happen towards sustainable food systems, towards regenerative agriculture, towards value-based economy, whether that comes in the form of, just like subsidizations for family farmers, for native farmers, or legalizing industrial hemp so we can heal soil and sequester carbon and divest from fossil fuels. All of this stuff, it's happening. It's happening. It's freaky, everything going on, but there are so many positive things, and I think the more we focus on that and say, yeah, we want that, more of that, it's up to us, pressuring our Congress people, and then also voting, maybe even more importantly, voting every day we go to the store, go to get a coffee, whatever, shopping local, buying organic. That's an investment in our future.
They're gonna yell at me backstage. But final thoughts from the two of you. What's giving you hope?
Well, I think you talk about food security. I think buying local and supporting family farms gives us more food security. And there's one thing for sure, without food, there'd be no security. You can't have a country and a safe, secure people without adequate food supply. And so I think that's very important. And having this local family farm and supporting them, Micah said voting with those dollars. Those dollars always are heard. When you buy local, that farmer appreciates it, I'm sure, and hopefully you're getting a whole lot better product, and it's better not just for you, but it's better for the planet, and it's better for the next generation.
So another thing Micah said, I feel like I'm quoting you a lot, friend, but you're right on the money. Health should equal food, and healthy doesn't equal nutritious. You can go buy a nutritious treat over here at the store, and all that's doing is displacing poverty and misery if it's coming from one of these big corporate food industry giants. Go buy it from one of the folks that are selling it at the farmer's market. Because healthy must provide equal economic benefit all the way through that food value chain, not just to the corporate giant.
Okay, before they come up here and drag me off for taking this way over time, let's give them a round of applause, our speakers. Thank them for the thoughts they shared.